Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Six straight wins. What a week it was for your Houston Rockets. And on this Tuesday, November 14th, that's what we're going to be discussing today here at the Lager Line, your source for podcast commentary on all things Houston Rockets basketball. As always, this show is served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing, their beer developed in collaboration with the Rockets. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of the team. I'm joined by my good friend out of Portugal, Paulo Alves, co-host and producer on this program. A lot to get to today because when we last recorded about 8 days ago, the Rockets were 2-3, so they had gotten off the snide, and the general theme of our discussion back then was that at 2-3, they're on pace to go at least 4-5 on the homestand, which was going into this opening stretch of 9 games, 2 on the road at Orlando and San Antonio, and then 7 at home. We said if the Rockets wanted to be at least on the fringe of play-in contention, they needed to be at least 4-5. And at 2-3 after an 0-3 start, we took a lot of consolation in the Rockets at least being on path to be relevant. Since then, things have changed dramatically. The Rockets somehow went 4-0 in those 8 days since we last had an episode, punctuated it with a win over the defending NBA champion Denver Nuggets on Sunday night, even with Nikola Jokic going for 36, 21, and 11. The Rockets, with their top 5 defense over the last 8 games, found a way to get it done yet again. And by all metrics right now, when you look at this basketball team, for the season as a whole now, the Rockets, number 7 overall in net rating, number 10 on offense, number 5 on defense. And if you throw out that opening night clunker way back on October 25th in Orlando when they lost by 30, and you look solely at these last 8 games, it's number 5 in net rating, number 4 on defense, and number 7 on offense. So actually undersold the defense a bit. Even if you consider the Orlando game and look at the full season, they're still top 5 in defensive rating. So a lot of this appears very, very genuine for the Rockets. This is not winning a game or two that they should have lost and just simply being primed for a regression. No, they genuinely appear to be a good NBA basketball team already, which is phenomenal work by Ime Udoka. And to this point, I think it's fair to say the season has wildly achieved all expectations that we had, all reasonable expectations, that is, going into the first 9 games with what we knew about the roster. Rockets have a bit of downtime this week before going on a fairly difficult West Coast road trip over the weekend against the Clippers and Lakers on the road, and then the Warriors, 3 games within a 4-night span. So that will certainly put the Rockets to this test, starting with Friday night's in-season tournament game against the Clippers and, of course, former Rocket James Harden. So there's a lot to unpack as we look at the week that was, as well as preview what's ahead. But I will just say off the top, this is one that you should celebrate because the success they've had, it appears to be sustainable. There's nothing fluky about it. And after 3 years of pure hell at the bottom of the Western Conference, to see the Rockets suddenly in the top 5 of the West and rising and looking like not just a fringe play-in team, as many of us hoped they could be starting this season. And I think we all knew that that was probably an ambitious expectation, or at least thought it was. To have them looking like a genuine playoff team at this point is just phenomenal work by Ime Udoka, his staff, and of course the players on the floor. And there's a lot of angles that we can go into as far as what we've learned, what we expect to see moving forward, key takeaways, key themes. But the big one for me, Paolo, that I want to address off the top, the way the Rockets have been able to close these games with the veterans they signed, it speaks so well to not just this 6-3 stretch to start the season and this 6-game winning streak that they're on right now, but also the larger blueprint that they went into this offseason trying to follow. Because Houston going into free agency with all that cap room, they were trying to thread a needle. You certainly needed veterans. We know the memes from last year. Anytime something would go wrong with the Rockets or you hear a veteran quoted from another team, there was the Flex Seal meme in which, the Rockets were the guy applying the Flex Seal and the Flex Seal going on was veterans. But in reality, it's not that simple. You have to have certain types of veterans. And the Rockets really tried to sort of, again, thread the needle on this. They needed veterans that are more impactful than Boban. No disrespect intended. His leadership is important. He's great for the vibe in the locker room. But his value in terms of on-court production is limited. And with a team this young, obviously, you do need superior defense and the things that guys like Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks give you on a night in, night out basis. But they also did not want to go to the high end of the spectrum with a guy like James Harden or Kyrie Irving or even Chris Paul. Because while those are good players that can certainly help you close out games, which the Rockets have needed their veterans to do of late, they're also the type of players where they're so established. To use James's own quote from his introductory press conference a couple of weeks ago with the Clippers, he's not a system player. He is a system. And it's fair for him to say that. He's a Hall of Famer. Last season, he was a top 10 or 15 player in the league when healthy. And guys like Kyrie and to a lesser extent, Chris Paul, although perhaps that's a little different now with him 40. We'll have to see how things go with him in Golden State. A lot of the same dynamic applies. What the Rockets wanted were guys who were capable on a given night of stepping up beyond just bringing defense and leadership, also helping you land the plane, if you will, like we saw Fred VanVleet do with the personal 8-0 run against the Pelicans with the 2 3-pointers in the final 80 seconds of that game to totally flip it. Like we saw Jeff Green do with the 13 fourth quarter points against the Nuggets on Sunday and what he did defensively, not only picking up a guy like Aaron Gordon, and we saw a similar vibe with Zion Williamson on Friday. Ime Udoka trusting Jeff's physicality over second-year guys such as Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason that still have a little bit of development physically to do. And on top of all of that, Jeff Green was actually calling out the Nuggets plays. We learned from Ime and Fred in their post-game comments. And Jeff, of course, played with the Nuggets a few months ago when they won the title. So that's just a little bonus for these games against the Nuggets. But there's 2 more this month. It certainly can't hurt to have that type of knowledge on your team, especially with, again, 3 games against the defending champs within the first month or so of your schedule. The bottom line, though, Jeff Green helped you land the plane, and that's really hard for a young team where with guys like Jalen and Alp and Jabari Smith, you're just trying to teach them to be consistently good NBA players. And in fairness to Alp, he is there already. The other guys, there's a little more inconsistency, although I know you've been impressed by certain things of Jalen's, Paolo, and I'll let you speak to that. But just in general, with these young guys that are in their second, third years, even rookies, you're just trying to get them to a consistently good to very good level over 48 minutes a night in an 82-game season. And the minutes at the end of games are disproportionately difficult because that's when there's no shortcuts. Your opponents, especially when you're playing a good team like Denver, are fully dialed in. So that's where you may need a veteran to step up and get you to the finish line, the way Fred did against New Orleans, the way Jeff Green did against Denver. And if you go back to the second game of this 6-game winning streak, the way Dillon Brooks did against the Kings when the Rockets trailed in that second half, going 7 minutes without a point in the mid to late third quarter. But then Dillon took over down the stretch, multiple threes, got some buckets out of the post. So that's one game already that you trailed in the second half. And in case of the Pelicans game, much later, that one of your veterans rescued for you. Dillon against the Kings, Fred against the Pelicans, Jeff against the Nuggets. And that's extremely important when you have a team this young, because those are the types of games that can flip. Whether you keep winning, you keep the vibes good, you avoid the rot of losing, or you let a game slip away. And if a guy like Jalen or Jabari has a bad night, then perhaps it's made worse by them feeling responsible for losing the game. The vibes around the team are not so good, and all of a sudden things can spiral because you get these wins, the vibes are good, the Rockets are going into practice this week with their tails up, and hopefully they take advantage of the practice because they're going to need it with 3 games in 4 nights against very good teams coming up. But the bottom line, to circle back to the larger point I was trying to make, it's not just that they're winning these games, it's how they're winning these games. And these contests that are close in the second half, that you're able to find a way to win on the back of your veterans, that speaks so well to the blueprint because it tells you that obviously these are not just token veterans that are there just to be voices in the locker room. They do that, but they also bring clear on-court value. Obviously, the defense, the structure, the tenacity they play with Fred VanVleet being a traditional point guard, limiting the turnovers, but they also have the ability on occasion to step up and actually get you to the finish line. That was the case for going after a James Harden or Kyrie Irving type. If you didn't trust where the Rockets were, and I'll admit I was nervous after the last couple of years, it was very easy to see a case for bring in a big name star and just get some more wins, avoid the rot of losing, avoid the possibility of going into a perpetual rebuild like the Timberwolves, the Suns, the Kings from 5 to 10 years ago. Just boost your floor and worry about the rest later. But there would be a rest to worry about in those cases, because with guys as accomplished as Harden, as Kyrie, as even CP3, it wouldn't be potentially as graceful of a transition when guys like Jalen Green, Alperen Sengun, Jabari Smith Jr., Amen Thompson, when he returns from injury, are fully able to grab the reins. The best part of this, it tells you that the Rockets, they got just the right veterans. They're good enough to where they're making a difference on the court. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure that if and when, as the season progresses, some of these young guys take further leaps, it's not as if Fred or Dylan or Jeff are going to be like, nah, you can't have this. We deserve more. No, they have the perfect blend of professionalism and humility. They're comfortable in their own skin, their roles, their placement in the NBA. And so to me, this just validates everything the Rockets tried to do this offseason. And it tells you that, in fact, Rafael Stone, Ime Udoka, Tillman Fertitta, whoever you want to give it credit for, I've seen those debates on Twitter. My response is always, who really cares? Even if it's Ime, well, the front office and ownership made the choice to empower him. Regardless, the organization got it right. And there's nothing about this when you look at the stats. Again, it's not like they've been super lucky. The offensive rating, defensive rating, overall rating, they're all top 10, several of them top 5. And then when you look at how they're winning, and ultimately for the Rockets this year, they're still not title contenders. Let's not get carried away. This season is always about blending the present with the future. You want to win more games, but you also want to not compromise your ability to be a title contender 2-3 years from now on the back of the young core, your core 6. Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore from this past draft, Jabari and Tari from 2 years ago, Jalen and LP from 3 years ago. And so it can be very difficult to blend in some configurations because you have to worry about, is there going to gracefully be a handoff as your young guys improve? To have veterans help you get some of these games, keep the vibes good for development, yet also knowing in the back of our minds that veterans like Fred and Dylan and Jeff are almost certainly going to be graceful and passing the baton, passing the keys to Jalen, to LP, to Jabari when the time is right. To me, that makes me feel really good that this is, in fact, a sustainable model for the Rockets, not just now and in the future. So, Paolo, there's a lot of layers to this. I know that was a long-winded answer to start off, but I just wanted to, I guess, begin our conversation with that, because to me, it's about more than simply winning 6 games. Everything that's happened as far as how the Rockets got to this 6-game winning streak, to me, it validates their approach this offseason and everything that they set out to do, really, since letting Stephen Silas go in April, hiring Ime, and then deciding what they did in free agency and everything since. So those are my opening comments. Paolo, anything I'm missing? Any follow-ups you want to add to that?
No, I don't think you're missing anything. I think you made a really good point about it doesn't matter who gets the credit. And I feel like in Rockets Twitter, we kind of become an ugly duck for every season. And it felt like early on it was going to be Jalen and Rafael Stone, and now they went from zeros to heroes all of a sudden. But regardless, listen, we won 6 games. I don't care if we won them because Fox was out and AD was out and Trey Murphy was out and Jamal Murray was out and whoever it was that was out. We won the games.
Eason was out for some of those games too, by the way.
Yeah. I can finally say that I follow Houston sports in general. I used to follow just the Astros and the Rockets. I started following the Texans. We follow Houston sports. We know that there's nothing given. Listen, this team could have easily lost all of these games against these teams without a winning player, without one of their winning players. I mean, listen, the Pelicans game was close. The Nuggets game was close. The Kings game could have gone wrong at certain points, the first one. So it's not this team last year would have lost some games here. They might have lost all of the games here. The team last year would beat sometimes some of the top teams, but it was mostly because they got really hot shooting and the other team just took the win for granted, right? This is the opposite this year. The main trend, I talked about in the podcast last week that I thought our wins were heavily predicated on us on hot shooting or the lack of it, and they've even proved that trend wrong. I mean, they beat the Nuggets. I'll get to the Nuggets game later because that's the big one, right? They beat the Lakers. They were hot shooting, but the game was not competitive, so the stat list became even more open. They beat the Pelicans shooting 28% from three. 28% from three.
Yeah.
The MO for this team is not going to be outscoring you, even though they've shown that they can. If we look at the wins, the Hornets game was a shootout, so if we ignore that one, the Kings scored 89 points the first game, 97 points the second game, 94, 101, and 104. And I mean, that's the biggest trend that you can take out of these games is we are going to make the game rough, and that's going to allow us to be inefficient on offense when it needs to be. That's why it's okay for Fred VanVleet to have 52% true shooting and sub 40% field goal percentage, because it doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters how efficient you are for sure, but we win games regardless of it. As long as we can be somewhat competent, the defense is picking up the slack. And that's the biggest transformation, and it's why Ime Udoka, has to be the favorite for Coach of the Year, just because of how massive the transformation is. Just like it's the same argument that CJ Stroud has for MVP. It's like when you contrast the state of the Rockets right now with what it was last year, it's a completely different team. They don't win the same way, they don't lose the same way, they don't play the same way. That there's nothing that is remotely comparable. Alperen Sengun went from an afterthought or somewhat of an afterthought to the main guy. He is by far the best player on this team. He's by far the most important player on this team. Jalen Green went from the main scorer to a guy with which we just won a game against the reigning NBA champions, while he had a terrible shooting night, 1 for 13, and when he still contributed to the win with his defense and his playmaking and his shaky but for the most part correct decision making down the stretch. It's basically the opposite, right? Jabari Smith Jr. is still shaky, and he was I guess he was awful last year, but still shaky. Tyrese is getting there, but it's just a completely different basketball team, and it feels awesome to finally be able to root for wins. It feels awesome to finally see things go our way, and you really cannot stress enough. Or my main overarching point is I cannot stress enough how important and how right the Ime Udoka hire was, because it has completely changed this team in a way that nobody could ever imagine.
And by the way, on the point of selfless approaches, we mentioned earlier veterans like Dylan and Fred and Jeff. I think we both feel pretty confident that it's not going to be an issue at all down the line if it turns out that guys like Jalen and Jabari and Amin are ready for bigger roles, and it comes at the expense of some shot attempts, touches, and perhaps even minutes for the other guys. They're in the right place in terms of their NBA careers. Another element of, I would say, the selfless mindset that Ime Udoka has installed on this roster, I thought it was really telling the last couple of games to see the young guys in particular, Jalen, Jabari, that were handed things coming out of the draft during the Stephen Silas phase 1 rebuild years, except not having things handed to them at all. We saw the last two games, basically Jeff Green being a part of the closing lineup instead of Jabari because Ime thought that was best for the team. We saw late in the Nuggets game, Jae'Sean Tate was actually subbed in for Jalen on a couple of key defensive possessions, and you didn't hear any griping from Jalen. To me, that speaks really well, certainly to Jalen and Jabari. I think it takes a certain degree of being humble that not every 20 or 21-year-old that was drafted in the top 2 or 3 of a recent draft would be able to stomach, especially if they had minutes guaranteed to them the first couple of years. I also think this goes back to, the last couple of years, we had so many conversations about a meritocracy, and a lot of folks would say, well, what does that mean? Do you not want your rookies to play at all? No, you can still start them. You can play them at least 24 to 30 minutes, but they don't have to be guaranteed minutes in high leverage times if there's something else that makes sense. And Ime is playing Tate instead of Green, at least a couple of possessions for defensive purposes. We saw Jeff in front of Jabari for defense, and also Jeff's shot was on Sunday against the Nuggets. So that really contributed to that. But I also think it speaks beyond just those individual players and their willingness to accept those roles. I think it speaks to the culture that Ime has set, that he can make that switch. Tate for Jalen to improve the defense, or Jeff for Jabari if Jeff is a really good matchup, and he was against Zion and Aaron Gordon, and nobody on the team bats an eye. They're willing to accept it. Beyond just the players themselves, to me, that's the kind of thing that takes a lot of work from the coaching staff, because players have to trust that coaching staff to actually buy in on that type of team dynamic, right?
Yeah, it is clear to everyone involved that the focus has shifted and that we are going to try and like milk every single edge that we can get in order to win the game. That's why it feels so great to watch the game and see, hey, literally every time that a mistake is made and there is an opportunity, Ime will talk to someone, be it Jalen, be it Jabari, be it whoever it is, even Şengün. He'll go out and he'll talk to them, or he'll have Fred VanVleet talk to them, or they'll huddle up, or Ben Sullivan will reach out, or any of these multiple things happen. When, as you said, the situational lineups, I mean, we haven't seen that in 3 years, and that clearly indicates to you that the priority was not winning. I mean, in the last 2 minutes of a game, to Ime's credit, he somehow manages to keep a lot of timeouts for late in the game. I think we had 4 for the last 2 minutes of the game last night.
It helps in general when your team is more mature and you're not having meltdowns over the course of a game. That also helps you keep those timeouts. Yeah,
for sure. But what main point is, at the end of the game, we see multiple different lineups played. We saw Jeff Green close out games for the last 2 games. And hey, if Jabari has a problem with it, hey, tough break. I mean, you weren't good enough. You're not going to play if you're not good enough. You're not offering enough on offense for it to warrant how lost you look on defense right now. And that's perfectly fine. But I wanted kind of to shift. I don't know if you have anything else on the culture. I want to shift to.
Go ahead.
No. If I'm going to shift topics, you might as well.
Yeah. Well, I was going to shift topics as well, but I just wanted to clarify what I said earlier about landing the plane. Because while the veterans, Fred, Dylan, and Jeff, did make the biggest shots in most of those games, and I think their willingness to eventually cede those roles a little bit if circumstances warrant is worth underscoring when it comes to the big picture of what the Rockets are trying to build. But while they made the big shots in that game, I do want to note that a lot of the opportunities were set up by playing through Alperen Şengün, and specifically through that 2-man pick and roll game, or just any sort of 2-man action between Fred VanVleet, your incredible point guard with a nearly 5-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, and Alperen Şengün, who most of the metrics have as top 10, top 15, top 20 in the NBA in terms of his production to this point. So even if Şengün didn't make the biggest shots down the stretch of many of those games, although he did have a huge and one against the Pelicans, just running through him and the pressure that pick and roll, that 2-man action between Fred and Alp generates, that has a lot to do with how guys like Jeff Green and Tari Eason had all those open corner threes against the Nuggets, because teams are so worried about that 2-man game, those pocket passes, that when they try to take that out, they're going to overcompensate. And that's what leads to opportunities for Jeff and Tari and Dylan and so many of the other heroes that have stepped up in recent games. And even Jalen. I think it's becoming clear that even though, Fred and LP is sort of the staple in clutch time that they go to, I do think that, Jalen is a good, if not 1B, at least option 2. So if you're putting more pressure on the defense through LP and Fred, then that perhaps gives Jalen a better shot to succeed at a more leveraged position if he gets the ball and has a better ability to attack. So the bottom line, I just want to make sure that we're giving LP his flowers, because even though he didn't technically land the plane in terms of scoring the bucket that wins you a game or going on a scoring outburst in the fourth quarter, a lot of their success offensively and defensively as well, the metrics don't lie there. He's been capable against pretty much everyone this year, and it's worth noting that LP at this point seems to be a constant along with Fred and Dylan in Ime's closing lineups in a way that even Jalen and Jabari aren't. So just want to make sure, I know we're trying to transition from culture to more X's and O's, what's going on within the roster itself. Just want to make clear that all P deserves his flowers. When I was referring to, landing the plane, it was more who scored the biggest buckets down the stretch at those games. When it comes to creating and actually who's responsible for sort of generating your offense and leading your defense, all P is right there with them. And so even though he's as young as Jalen and only a year ahead of Jabari, he has been ahead of them this season. And as you said earlier, he's been clearly the best player on the team. Just want to make sure that I sort of draw that distinction. We're not overlooking all P at all.
Oh yeah, I was planning on having an entire diatribe later on the pod about Alpi. I think he's earned it from someone who was skeptical.
Let's jump into it now, because what's
I
going to
wanted
ask you later on, is he a star? At this point, we're seeing a long enough sample. Look, 9 games out of 82 is not insignificant. Is this a year that he can make a push for legitimately being an all-star? Again, these are not empty calorie numbers. They're coming in wins. The advanced metrics love him. Are we approaching a point, especially when you look at the defensive metrics and he doesn't look like a liability at all on that end? Are we close to saying Alperen Sengun is a star player in the NBA?
Yeah, so I actually have a longer overarching point about that. I just wanted to touch on something that you said that sparked like an analogy in my brain.
Fair enough.
You talked about the vets, and you talked about the difference between Fred VanVleet and a James Harden type, right? And I think it's like it's kind of like the vets that we got. This team had some very clear gaping holes, right? And we plugged those in, so it was easy to target, specific types of vets. We had a lot of cap space, but very specific big holes, but not a lot of holes, right? So you spent a lot on single free agents instead of spending on a lot of them that would require playing time. But the analogy is that guys like Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks and Jeff Green, they're like training wheels, right?
Yep.
Alperen Sengun and Jalen Green are still the ones driving the bike, but they still need the training wheels to hold them, to keep them accountable and to keep the defense in place and to keep the coaches on the floor and then to have the stability, right? Just like training wheels on a bike. If you had gone for James Harden, instead of it being training wheels on a bike,
it's an entirely different
bike. It would be like if your mom or your dad were driving you around everywhere. You're not really learning anything.
That's a better analogy.
Doing it. Yeah, you're not really learning much while doing it. You're being successful, yes, but how much of it is sustainable, and how much of it is you just dooming yourself to mediocrity, which is a lot of people are now saying, oh well, the Rockets are, they spend a lot in free agency. Their priority is winning now because they don't have the picks, and they might be good now, but they're not setting themselves up for later. No, that's exactly the opposite of what's happening, because you see Fred VanVleet is key and he's winning some games, but the games are only close because Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun and Tari Eason are, Jabari to a lesser extent, are, being the engines to that success. And as time goes on, you are going to require less out of Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks and Jeff Green. And the weight will shift towards the young guys, but you can do that gradually while retaining a lot of the upside, because you still have 6 rookies selected in the top 20 that were, I think anybody could argue that they were worthy of all of them being selected in the top 10 in their respective drafts. And so the Rockets aren't shortcutting.
Yeah.
Right? It's the training wheel thing that I was talking about.
Yeah. And by the way, speaking of Jeff, let's give him his flowers in particular for him to do what he's doing on both ends of the court at age 37. And I believe you're 16 in the NBA. He's one of only 2 guys with Seattle Supersonics roots, along with Kevin Durant, his teammate when they were rookies. Just a remarkable story that he's still doing this in 2023, going into 2024. And to tie everything together as far as the offseason, the blueprint, Fred versus Harden, where this all comes together is trust in Ime Udoka. Because the reason this was not an easy decision for the Rockets, and I'm not just saying that myself, I know that people within the Rockets were torn at times in terms of which is the better path for us. If you acquire a James Harden or Kyrie Irving, it's almost a guarantee that you're going to be relevant. It's really hard when you have a player of that stature to win less than 25 games like the Rockets did the last 3 years. You're going to almost certainly be 30 plus just with those guys and any baseline competency elsewhere. And so the appeal, if you're really worried about things, then you say, you know what, let's just go for that new car and worry about the long term, as you were saying later. There was some risk to the Fred and Dylan path, because Fred, Dylan, Jeff Green, and year 3, Jalen and Şengün, I guess year 2, Jabari and Tari can contribute somewhat to winning. The floor is lower. There are no guarantees with that group, or were no guarantees just from a talent perspective. You have to really trust your head coach to be able to be the straw that stirs that drink and combines this in the appropriate way. And ultimately, what the Rockets did this offseason, they said, you know what, we trust Ime Udoka. We went out and paid top 5, top 10 money for a coach. We love his track record in Boston. We did that for a reason. We believe in him. So we're going to empower him to have input on roster decisions with all that money in free agency and perhaps the draft as well. We're going to empower him to implement his system with guys he thinks are best for that and for the blending of the present with the future. And ultimately, that's what's paying off now. So where this all comes back to and how it all ties together, it's a perfect way to sort of put a bow on the first part of our podcast today and transition to the second, which I'm guessing is going to be a bit more about Alperen Şengün and the stardom there. But as far as the culture, this is where you have to have organizational alignment. And to me, you can't look at Fred and James or Kyrie or anybody else in a vacuum. It has to make sense from the top down. And the bottom line is the Rockets made the decision, even if it's a little bit riskier, hey, there's more long-term upside. There's a better ability to blend with the future if we do it this way. And they gave the keys to Ime Udoka. You know, I know I used the keys analogy earlier with the players from the big picture. It's Ime who has the keys for this franchise. That was a tactical choice in and of itself. That's where Fred and Dylan fit in as really the perfect bets, threading the needle between, you know, your lower tier vets who are just a nice voice in the locker room and aren't going to do a lot on the court, as opposed to then going too high on the other end of the scale, guys that are so good, so dominant that it might hurt your ability down the line to pass the baton to Jalen, to Alp, to Jabari Smith Jr., to Amen Thompson, to the next generation. But for the Rockets to go down this path, they had to trust Ime Udoka. That's what they did. And through 9 games, they're certainly reaping the rewards, not just in terms of the win-loss record, but also the metrics. There's nothing about this that's fluky at all. Everything appears genuine. We'll see how it holds up on the road. But regardless, it's a phenomenal start to the season that has overachieved even our wildest expectations, I think, going in. Now, let's circle back to where we were a few minutes ago, talking about Alperen Şengün. Paolo, I know you've been sort of all over the place the last couple of years in terms of your view on him, not just in the moment, but more how he fits in the big picture. But for me, we're getting to a point where he may be the him. And to an extent, the Rockets are already leaning on him more than anyone down the stretch of these games, even if he's not scoring, because opposing defenses are committing more resources to him. He's doing a lot of the playmaking. It seems that the 2-man action between Fred and Alp is sort of the foundation of what they want to do in high leverage moments. Defensively, all the metrics show that he has held his own and then some this year. Overall, most of the models I follow have him somewhere in the 10th to 20 range in terms of players in the NBA. It's 9 games in. I guess we got to see it for a little while longer, but I'm getting close to anointing Alperen Şengün a star, not just in terms of his potential, but what he is today. Paolo, where are you at on that front?
Yeah, I think it's insane. I'll get into the entire full.
And of course, and Udoka is the bridge, by the way, because of course Udoka's had a lot to do with him taking this next step.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with that. I don't agree with. I think it was Salman that tweeted that, oh, don't pretend like Alperen Şengün was always this bad defensive player and then now all of a sudden he's a good player. That this was always there. I disagree with that. I think he was a pretty bad defensive player at various points. And if you go back and check, we were much better with him on the floor, but he was still a pretty poor defensive player, affected as well from the terrible perimeter defense and the schemes that we were running around him, right? But he was not as good of a decision maker as he is now. Like he got more blocks and he still got deflections when given the chance. Not as good as he has been. He has been incredibly disciplined. The foul. I mean, are we forgetting about the foul trouble that he would get himself into literally every single game? Anyways, that's the past. That's just a narrative thing, right? I'll get into my philosophical type of thing on team building after we just mentioned how good he's been. I mean, he is 0.1 points per game away from me being able to round out 19.5 to 20, so I'll just call it 20. He's 28-6 with 2 turnovers a game, insane assist to turnover ratio, insane efficiency. It's above 60%, I know, or I already know, 63% true shooting. And most of all, it's how much the Rockets depend on him to make the correct decision offensively, right? Because even offensively last season, there were times where, because he is a smart guy, that he wouldn't make the correct decision for the scheme, but perhaps the correct decision for the team, right? He wouldn't roll hard enough, right? Or he would favor hitting cutters out of his post-ups instead of three-point shooters. Why? Because, well, he didn't trust anyone to feed him on the roll. Didn't trust the guards to take advantage of it, and he didn't trust our shooters to knock down shots, and so he would try to go for the home run play, which was often a pass off to whoever was cutting Jalen, KJ, or Keshante when he was healthy, right? All of these kind of bad habits that I was afraid would stick on from last season haven't at all. Like, he is reset all the way back to when he came in as a rookie, where he would make the correct read, and these biases weren't there. And I think a big part of that is because he has faith in the system right now, and the system has faith in him as well, right? The system does not work without him. So he has been an incredible decision maker. Just you'd never really doubted that he would, but it's still good to know that he is. He's also been by far the player that has improved the most consistently year after year out of our young core. You can point to Jalen Green's foul drawing from year 1 to year 2. Or the strides he has made defensively and decision-making wise offensively. It's nowhere near the progress that Sengun has made defensively and offensively, right? It would have been really easy for him to fall into those bad habits that I just mentioned with his decision-making offensively. He didn't. He broke those fairly easily. I was extremely impressed, and I said this on Twitter, and not a lot of people agreed with me. I thought his best game so far was against the Nuggets. And I thought he did a tremendous job defending Nikola Jokic. Listen, you're not going to stop Jokic. And he did do a tremendous job in a game where Jokic dropped 36, 21, and 11. But it wasn't his fault that he dropped that many points and that many assists. So listen, this is the MVP of the league. He's going to get those stats no matter what. Nobody's going to lock him up. You could put Rudy Gobert in there. It wouldn't make a difference. He held his own defensively enough so that it wasn't backbreaking, right? Because Jokic is the entire system for the Nuggets. He is going to get his. You just can't let it be backbreaking where they go on massive runs. They made it tough enough for him to score that the Rockets were able to keep up on the other end. How impressive is it? I mean, that the Rockets are at the top 5, you said, top 6 defense?
Yeah.
On the season,
top 5.
While starting Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and Alperen Sengun. None of which are good defenders, but if you go just straight off of reputation for the sake of argument, Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun were pretty much doomed by every analyst out there to not be good defenders for the last 2 years for their careers. And they've managed to make it work. So I think he did an awesome job defending. I came off so much higher on him just last game for what he did with Jokic. And I think it's time, or the fact that he has improved so much over every single year. Oh, wait. Before I get into the philosophical point, I can't not mention I cannot take basically any victory laps when it comes to Sengun because of how much I doubted him. But I will take a mini one, which was we had an argument on this podcast in which I said more important than a 3-point shot for Alperen Sengun is some sort of mid-range shot, just so he can function as a hub.
Good recall.
I don't know if you can remember that. And how many of you, he used to always need to back in, even in the short roll, he would always need to back into his defender and get the baby hook, or back into his defender and get the layup. He doesn't need to do that anymore. He's got the little shot, but he's got the
that push
one-legged.
Yep.
Yeah, he's got the Dirk one-legged fadeaway, and those shots are so important because teams haven't started adjusting yet. But when they do, he's going to get to the rim every single time because they're going to play up on him. And if they help, he's gonna get a corner 3 every single time. We aren't getting enough corner 3s, but we will once teams start adjusting to how good our guys have been. Listen, how good Sengun has been.
Well, it's already started to happen. Look at the corner 3s that Tari and Jeff got late in the Denver game. Yeah,
exactly. And so as teams will listen, right now we're beating them one way, but we'll start beating them a different way because it's a zero-sum game. If you take somewhere, you're gonna give somewhere. And Alperen Sengun has proved to be the decision maker to punish those advantages.
Yeah, they started to take away those pocket passes, and the open 3s from the wing and the corner are sort of a byproduct of that.
Yeah. So now to shift a little bit into the philosophical point. Listen, he has been the guy that has improved the most year after year from our young core. And what I've always said is that while philosophically my ideal basketball team has a rim protector or a switch big, because I think you build the defense first, and then you get the one transcending player and you try to incorporate that. But maybe he is becoming that transcendent player. He has been that good, and he has gotten better every single year. But the cloud of does it translate to winning always kind of hung around him or around my impressions of him, because I wasn't smart enough of a basketball mind to see how he could become a passable and right now a positive defender on an NBA team. And we still don't know how this would pan out in a playoff series when teams perhaps could target him more than they're doing right now. But then again, why does that matter? I mean, aren't we kind of getting too ahead of ourselves? Listen, we've been talking all off season about how hard it is to take the step from being a terrible 20-win team to just a passable team. And he's showing with his production right now that we can go from a terrible team to perhaps a playoff team. He's that good. And if he's that good, listen, all of these worries about the future, while they remain valid, and we'll see down the line if they matter or not, because, well, clearly I was wrong about him being able to be a good A+ defender. So maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there's ways that I just don't know about, just I'm not smart enough to know, that allow you to include him in a guy that, even though he has limited ability when it comes to his athleticism and his tools defensively, he is a really smart player, and that has to help. It's kind of the Al Horford type of thing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And as far as the future, one thing I want to clarify, if he continues to play like this, there should be no hesitation when it comes to contract extension talks next summer. You can give him a 4-year deal. Hell, if he continues to play this well and continues at a top 15, top 20 level for a full season, you could even give him the max. And before anyone recoils at hearing that, again, the max for young guys is very different from the max for veterans. We've talked a lot about contracts for Fred VanVleet now and what James Harden could have gotten and so on and so forth. No, it's different for young players. And if he continues to play at this level, even if, let's say, the Rockets are somewhere around a 500 team, maybe even a little bit below and still in sort of fringe play-in mode, Western Conference is hard. This is still a relatively small sample, a lot of home games. All those caveats are fair to throw on that. But if he continues to play at this level, worst case, even if for some reason you're not 100% sure on how he fits with you and you end up needing something else around, let's say Jalen or Amin, looks like they're going to be the number one on a championship team, and you think there's a better big fit than All-Peace, someone with a bit more rim protection and above the rim potential rim running on offense, I guess, then the bottom line is if All-P continues to play at this level, any contract he'd be on would be positive value. In worst case, you could trade him later. So the bottom line is it's got to continue. I'm not saying that, 9 games is enough to just give him a blank check, but if it continues throughout the year, the contract thing resolves itself. If he's playing at this level, you give him the contract, and as far as the fit, even if for some reason, it turns out that one of your other young core members, most likely Jalen or Amin, breaks out in a huge way and you need a better fit up front, you can always move him later, the way that the Pacers did with Domantas Sabonis, not making that as an apples to apples comp, because Şengün actually outplayed him significantly, and I think he has a lot more versatility to his game. We saw the 2 head-to-head matchups when the Kings and Rockets played a week or so ago. Just saying, philosophically, you don't even have to answer the question of, is he the center on your championship team 2-3 years from now when you make a decision about whether to offer him an extension and how much. He's simply going to have that value in and of itself if he continues to play at that level. And if that's the scenario, you don't have to think about anything else, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, he has proven me and everybody that has doubted him wrong every step of the way, right?
Right.
And so there's no reason to not believe or to not ride it out. Yeah, to not let him ride it out and go as far as he can take you. And if you eventually hit a glass ceiling, then you make a decision, because
but he's still going to have positive trade value, so there's no reason to worry about it.
Yeah, absolutely he will. And so the other thing that from my point of view, even though I still think that ideal basketball, and I may be wrong about this, right? That everybody has their belief. This is one of my core beliefs when I watch basketball, right? Which is why it's so tough for me to. Which is why it's so tough for me to shift from it, because shifting from it means reworking the entire way I view the game.
Yeah. Although the one thing I would say to you real quickly is keep in mind that this stuff changes by the year. the blueprint for a successful perennial contending team in 2023 is different than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So this stuff is always evolving. So it may not even be that you're necessarily wrong. It may be that this is the next evolution and where the league is going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it could totally be. I think part of it is that, well, when I got to watching basketball, the Warriors were a thing, and this is how you beat the Warriors, right?
Right, exactly.
And I do think
teams of the future may be different.
Yeah, and I do think it's mostly because, and this is going to sound kind of arrogant, but I do think that while the Warriors were a thing, we got the closest to perfect basketball that we've ever gotten to, as when it comes to efficiency and defense and everything like that. And then eventually, I think that the league got more talented, like 1 through 5 on a team, but the peak isn't quite as high when it comes to talent, and that may be a hot take. But that's why even when we were rebuilding, I think it will eventually some superstar talent is going to come around, or some new dynasty is going to be built that's probably going to be reliant on shooting threes and hunting mismatches, which is basically what basketball is about. And eventually we'll shift back into it when the next super team comes around. Perhaps the next super team is never going to come around. Who knows? But all of this to say that Sengun has basically proven everybody wrong the entire way. There's no reason to believe that he won't continue to do that moving forward, which is why you need to get on with the times and listen. This is the best player we have, and he's so good that I think people are kind of forgetting. He's 21 years old. There's still more that he can still develop a 3-point shot.
Yeah.
He can still get even better on defense. It's not like there's still more. It's hard to imagine what it would look like for Sengun to hit his peak when, I'll say it right now, and as I've already said it this last season, but the last season it would have been a flaming hot take because the Rockets were awful, so you could never say this, but I said it. I thought that when the Kings were playing the Warriors in the playoffs, I said, I think Alperen Sengun is a better player than Domantas Sabonis right now. And this year he's been given the usage and the featured role that he deserves, and he has proven that to be the case. And by such a wide margin that I just think, even though Sabonis is a well-rounded player for a center, he's still somewhat one-dimensional in the sense that he brings you a lot of rebounding, but on defense it doesn't bring you much. And then even his scoring, he can pass the ball some, but he's not an offensive hub. Right, he can do dribble handoffs, right? It's not to the level of reads that Alperen Sengun can do, and it's not as consistent where you can run the entire defense, the entire offense around him. So I think offensively he's already past that point, and defensively, even though he lacks the size, he's a lot smarter and he has a lot better hands than Sabonis does. And so I think he's past. Sabonis is an all-star. Well, Sengun's playing like an all-star right now, but he's past that phase, and he's somewhere between Sabonis and Jokic. And part of the argument before was, well, it would be, really optimistic for you to say that you're sure that he'll be better than Sabonis. Well, he's already, so let alone Jokic, so he's already better than Sabonis. And so we've seen that Sabonis is probably not enough offensively to win, and the comparison doesn't really even make sense anymore because I think Sengun's better on both ends, but Sabonis is not good enough offensively to drive a contender or to be the second best player in a contender. All respect to the Kings, I don't think they were a contender last year. I don't think they're a contender now. Good regular season team, and we know Jokic is good enough, to win the championship and be the MVP. And you probably don't need to be as good as Jokic to win a championship. Depends on what you have around and how you build the system. But I know we've talked about Sengun a lot, but listen, I'm not sure I was wrong in the sense that I don't know how this will play out in a playoff series, but I was wrong in the sense that we should, I think we should treat him as the franchise player going forward. He is, that guy, and you should
He's
ride
the him for now.
Yeah, and we should ride with him as far as he can take us, which I'm guessing is very far. And even if he can't get us over the final hump, he will be looked upon very fondly as the guy that, at the very least, transitioned us from the worst team in the league to eventual contention. And I'm not saying that's this year. It could be next year. It could be the year after. But he has been awesome. And I still want to talk about the other players, but I feel like I've gone on for like half an hour, so you
Yeah.
take it away.
Well, just a couple of quick things, one micro, one macro to close the book on Şengün, and then we'll transition to other players and the games ahead. We'll sort of blend what we want to see, what needs improvement. That'll be our final segment as we wrap up the pod. Micro point on Şengün. He held Nikola Jokic to 7 of 17 shooting as the primary defender on Sunday, 41%. So even within the ridiculous stat line that Jokic had with 36, 21, and 11, All-P still did his job in one-on-one settings. And yes, there's more to defense than just one-on-one being the primary defender. But I do think it speaks to this idea that there might be more tools than some of us thought there were based on the first couple of seasons. Macro point to what you were saying as far as Şengün being the guy right now, clearly the best player on the team. I would love to see the organization, and I suspect they will if this continues for another couple of weeks, really make an all-star push for Alperen Şengün. Make him the focal point of their marketing efforts. Because, of course, while they'll certainly promote all their starters, every team does, there's a clear way to really put front and center the guy who you're truly making the case for that has a realistic chance. And I think that would be really big organizationally because the last couple of years, it felt like that despite the numbers, they didn't truly believe in him. He was always in the shadow of Jalen and Jabari based on their draft positioning. I think a perfect way to sort of show that this year is different. Certainly, Ime Udoka is doing it in terms of usage on the floor. I mentioned earlier that while Jalen and Jabari aren't guaranteed to be part of the closing lineup, All-P at this point is. I think a way the organization could show that it's different is if, despite the fact that he was a 16th overall pick and Jalen Jabari were top 3, I think if you make All-P the centerpiece of, your franchise push for the All-Star game, which I do think there's at least somewhat of a chance for, especially if the Rockets win enough games and keep the buzz going, I think that would really go a long way to showing, the fan community and people around the NBA that, yes, this is truly different. It's really a meritocracy now. You're going to get what you earn on the court. And right now, All-P is the guy earning it. And so, yeah, the organization should repay him in turn. And I think that's something they should and hopefully will do. And I also think beyond just what it shows All-P, I think it's also good to show that to the league when you talk about building the reputation of the organization and showing how it's different to potential free agents and draft picks down the line than clearly rewarding and embracing the guy who's your best player as opposed to trying to fight it and play a different way just based on archetypes and draft stock and all those types of factors. I think rewarding a guy like Şengün for his consistently excellent play is a way to show that the culture has truly changed, not just in terms of day-to-day coaching, but the organization and the overall alignment in a way that's different from the last couple of years. All right, final segment as we wrap up. We've talked a little bit about other players, the veterans. We should also throw some love to Jae'Sean Tate, who has come back with a vengeance this season after missing most of last year with an injury. And I think a lot of us, the combination of A, forgot how good he can be, and 2, hadn't actually seen him on a truly contending team, which is where a lot of his gifts on defensive end can really shine. So Rockets, in my opinion, clearly made, when we talk about their decisions over the offseason, besides the Fred VanVleet, James Harden stuff, Dillon Brooks, they also had to decide between Jae'Sean Tate and KJ Martin because there was clearly only space in the rotation for one. And clearly the organization made the right choice with Jae'Sean Tate. He is a winning player, and it's just a perfect fit with what Ime Udoka wants to do. So let's give Rafael Stone, Patrick Fertitta, anyone else in the front office their flowers for that one. And also Tari Eason rounding back into form, even though he's still not there conditioning-wise after missing a few weeks with the stressful reaction in his leg. Boy, when he's out there, he still looks very, very good. And his 2 threes against the Nuggets were a big part of when they finally got separation in that game in those minutes without Nikola Jokic. So Jae'Sean and Tari are 2 guys for me that I want to sort of highlight as being key contributors in recent days. As far as the road trip, look, I'm not going to put an expectation on wins because Clippers, Lakers, Warriors, those are tough teams all on the road. I will say if the Rockets are legitimate, they should win at least one. It's tough. There's no scheduling break on the road 3 and 4 nights. I do think that if they're not just play-in consideration good, but maybe even playoff worthy, the top 5 to top 10 team that most of the metrics show them at now, you should over 3 nights have one game where the shooting luck goes your way. And who knows, maybe they overachieve, maybe they keep the streak going. They will have a rest advantage. And it's worth noting that the Clippers have had some real growing pains since trading for James Harden. I believe they haven't even won yet. So who knows, maybe one is underselling them. But I'm going to set a conservative estimate at 1 and then say that you can really start to make some hay when you get home again. Memphis has had a rough start to the year without Ja Morant. You'll then have Denver again on Friday the 24th. Memphis game is 22nd. Denver on the 24th. That's apparently without Jamal Murray again. So as long as the Rockets win at least one on the road, but who knows? Maybe this is like when we said that they should go 4-5 in that first 9 stretch, and they go 6-3, and they surprise us again. I'm just being conservative for the time being. As far as things I want to see, Jabari Smith Jr. is someone who, especially defensively, you want to start seeing some strides. With Jalen Green, I'm sort of torn. There is a little bit of volatility to his game. He had the 34 points on insane efficiency, 11 of 15 shooting, and just electric from the three-point line against the Lakers, and then 1 of 13 against the Nuggets. But the impact stats, and you hinted at this earlier, show that this is not Jalen from the first 2 years. I was looking at the, Hoops Hype's global rating is one of the things that I follow. And it's one of many I referenced earlier that has Alperen Sengun as, I believe, a top 15 player. But here's what's really interesting. As of Monday, they had Fred VanVleet, I believe, at 36th. You know who's 37th in the NBA? Jalen Green. And that's a remarkable rise when you look at his efficiency metrics from the last couple of years. So even though in terms of shot making, free throws, three-pointers, we see all these things that he needs to improve, and perhaps since he's so speed-based, he's a De'Aaron Fox type that maybe it's not year 3, maybe it's year 4, year 5 that he breaks out. I know Nathan Fogg has sort of pointed to that, and Chris White, Firebar on Twitter, someone who's made the Fox analogy. Nathan Fogg has said that he thinks year 4, not year 3 is where the true breakout comes. So maybe with Jalen's profile, it's not this year that you see the true ascent into stardom. But what I would say is that even though he is doing some things better defensively, the Rockets are able to have him on the court in the fourth quarter. He's able to hold his own. Some of the metrics like him a lot better than the last couple of years. Of course, he's also flanked by better defenders, so it's sort of a chicken or the egg situation there. But what I will say in terms of expectations, I would like to see more consistency. Obviously, not every player is going to shoot the same from one night to the next. There's a lot of randomness involved. But a guy who scores 34 points on insane efficiency against the Lakers from 2, from 3-point range, from the free throw line, shouldn't be 1 of 13 against the Nuggets. Even though they won that game, it was underwhelming for Jalen from a shooting perspective. It's great that he still contributed defensively. He still made a couple nice passes, especially the one to Sengun late in the game. So it's not like he was a zero the way he would have been if he had that shooting line the last couple of years. But I do think as far as areas for improvement, really Jabari across the board. And then Jalen, it's not so much that he's been bad, especially the past week. He's been pretty damn good overall. But I do think you'd like to see less extreme peaks and valleys and, less just 1 of 13 games that feel almost like clunkers. I guess that's what I'm looking for. Paolo, anything else that you've noticed from the last 4 games since we recorded, or things you're watching for? I guess you can blend the two together, things you've noticed and also things you want to see continued or things you want to see improved on this upcoming 3-game road trip.
Yeah, I think you have to touch on Jae'Sean Tate. We know what Jae'Sean Tate can bring on literally every facet of the game. He has been much better decision-making wise offensively. He still makes some questionable decisions from time to time, but we saw him be really good year 1. And then kind of with Alperen Sengun make some questionable decisions on post-ups and forcing stuff. That's gone from the game, basically. And he's shooting 44% from 3, which never hurts, right? And if he's shooting 34% from 3, he's a massive plus whenever he's on the floor. It's just, can you keep that consistent enough for teams to respect your shot for you to make them punish? You don't need, the Rockets have established you don't need to be that efficient to play for this team as if you're a good defensive player, because that's how they're going to win the games. But you need to be somewhat passive for the system not to break down around you. Big ups for Jae'Sean Tate. Made a game-saving, perhaps, or game-sealing, I'll call it, play on the inbounds in the game against the Nuggets.
And then had the wherewithal to save it and get it to, I believe, Jeff Green and keep that possession alive. And
then about Jalen, it's as you said, he's been able to impact game different ways. Besides his scoring, but it's just he's still underwhelming, and I think we're at a point where I think Nathan Fox also touched on this, where it's not just that he needs to get stronger, because he's got a fairly, he does get thrown off. He does get thrown off.
Oversimplified.
Yeah. He does get thrown off his center of gravity, like fairly, like he gets thrown off balance fairly, often. But it's not just that. There's not many counters when it comes to finishing at the rim that he has. He's not great at reading the defenders and seeing how he can finish around them or through them. He's also not getting the foul calls when driving to the basket, which is, rough. It's mostly that his finishing at the rim is not that great for a guy that's that, athletic. And that's something that you'll have to work through. And it's not as simple as just putting on more weight or making better decisions of when to drive versus when to not drive. It's that. And until that translates fully or that evolves, and I hope the coaching staff is working on it with him on that, because the first 2 years I doubt Stephen Silas could tell that was a problem. He'll have to rely on his jump shot, and so far he is shooting, I think 40 on the dot, 40% from three, which is kind of saving his efficiency somewhat. He's going to need to. It's part of it will come from shot selection, but he's going to need to get just better at finishing at the rim, and that's going to be huge. He although that being said, I think he is a positive and he has good plus minus numbers because the Rockets don't have guys that can easily create space off the dribble besides Alperen Sengun. And so when Alperen Sengun, or by themselves, Alperen Sengun's not off the dribble all the time, but you know what I mean.
Right.
Fred VanVleet's not one of those guys. He's not going to get his own shot. He's going to manipulate the defense and get someone else a better shot. But Jalen, even though he struggles and he has games where he struggles, he is still so far, by far and away, the best, guy or the biggest threat besides Alperen Sengun, which makes it so he still impacts how defenses are defending the Rockets by just being on the floor. And there is a clear difference between Sengun versus non-Sengun minutes. But if you pay attention to just the feel of the game, there's a very clear difference between a Jalen Green versus non-Jalen Green minutes, especially when Alp is not on the floor as well. And you can feel that difference, and you can feel that he's impacting winning, even though he has games where it looks like he's just the guy people say is a chucker. He is impacting the game even when he's not scoring, which is great progress, and hopefully we can figure out the scoring going forward. And besides that, for my trend moving forward, the Rockets don't really need or don't really use weak side rim protection that much because the defense breaks down very not often at all. But there's been a few possessions here and there where Tari Eason has been on the floor, and you can tell he is the best weak side helper at the rim that we have. It's not Jabari, unfortunately. It was never really going to be Sengun because of his limitations defensively. You can really ask for all of that. But Tari has really good instincts, and he's gotten a couple of highlight blocks on guys that, when he's out on the floor, those are guaranteed buckets or fouls. And Tari has athleticism and the length to bring that to this team. And that, rim protection is one of the things that I would target if the Rockets were to make a trade for something.
Although, let me ask you about that. That was something I meant to ask during the Sengun discussion, and there were so many layers to it that I just got sidetracked. So there's a lot of people that have talked about the Clint Capella hypothetical using the Victor Oladipo contract, which you can aggregate in mid-December, basically 60 days after his acquisition date, sometime in mid-October, in, of course, the Kevin Porter Jr. deal. And while I'm open to that, I actually wouldn't mind trying at like a lower price point. You mentioned Nerlens Noel as a free agent you could sign to potentially upgrade that position. And the reason I'm sort of intrigued by that, there's a lot of games where you may not need a true backup center. Jock Landale's been obviously very underwhelming to this point. I also don't think he's in shape. So, maybe he plays better in the weeks ahead and renders some of this conversation moot, although he's not really a rim protector, even when he's at his best, or at least a rim runner, we should say, not really an above the rim type. But the way the Rockets are with Tari Eason back, and you add that to the front court guys you already have, and so your reserves are Jeff Green, Jae'Sean Tate, and now Tari Eason, there are matchups where you may play one of those guys at the 5 or Jabari Smith Jr. There's just so many forwards to potentially play, and a lot of teams don't really have the roster composition where you need that rim running big. And so if you're at a lower price point, you sort of have the optionality. Like if you sign Nerlens Noel or trade for Nerlens Noel type, that type of player is not going to bat an eye if you say, hey, I don't play you this game because I want to play one of these other guys, the versatile forwards, and play a little smaller. As opposed to a Clint Capella, I understand how he fits the role, but it would be a little more difficult for a guy of Clint's stature to accept the occasional DMP CD if the matchup calls for the Rockets to play those other guys. So I'm not gonna say it's a slam dunk because at a bare minimum, the Rockets do need to make some sort of Oladipo trade, if for no other reason, just to not have that salary slot fall off the books. You want to have that available for future trades this offseason or even in the next season if you don't make the big trade now. But, I'm sort of on the fence. Like, I agree that Clint's ideal in terms of he fits a need, but you could also sell me on going a bit lower with someone that has a bit more optionality. You don't have to play them every game, because I also think there's games where, like the Denver matchup, where you want to roll with Jeff Green and Tari Eason as your reserve front court and not go big at all. Where do you fall on sort of that balance and dynamic?
So the fan in me wants to trade for Clint Capella, just because he was like my second favorite player while he was here.
Team.
Yeah, I absolutely love Clint Capella. And as much as I love rim protection, I think for this team at this point, seeing how they're holding up defensively, it makes more. And I think this is going to surprise a lot of people. I think it makes more sense to trade for a guy like Kelly Olynyk than it makes to trade for a guy like Clint Capella. Because the defense is already that good, and you're struggling because you can't really create offense off the bench unless it's hustle plays. And Olynyk can do, he's not Alperen Sengun. He can give you, he's a great offensive player, right? He's still 60, 40, 80 splits as he was when he was here. And the way the Rockets play defense, can you not ask him to do a lot of the same stuff that Alperen Sengun is doing on a defensive end? And you can still surround him with guys like Amen Thompson and even Aaron Holiday and Tari Eason and Jabari Smith and Jason Tate. You can still surround them by these guys, and you'll have, a sort of sixth man that kind of fits the way you play with the main guys as well, and that can space the floor. That's going to fit really well with Amen Thompson when he plays. He can do all the dribble handoff stuff. He's a smart guy positioning himself. He has good hands to catch the passes off the pick and roll that Amen likes to kind of throw over the top of defenders instead of bouncing them in.
I guess the way I would look at it with the Oladipo contract and any bigger moves, and I think we're largely in alignment, it should be more on quality than pigeonholing yourself into I need X guy for X role, because the team is deep enough as it is. It's not like there's anything insanely glaring. You can potentially fill some of these bit roles with reduced, I guess, asset costs. Again, you could even sign a Nerlens Noel type for nothing, just giving him a minimum deal, which you have an unlimited supply of. So when we're talking about something bigger, be it the Oladipo contract. Sorry, what?
I didn't mention this last part. It would cost you like waiving Boban.
Okay, well, yeah, but a minimal cost in terms of your on-court formula, I should say. No disrespect to Boban intended. But the bottom line is, when we're talking about any bigger moves, again, it's not that I'm like opposed to Clint by any means, but I wouldn't laser in on it, because for me, this team is diverse enough as it stands that you can be, a bit more choosy and going for, quality, as opposed to, I guess, just having to have one certain guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I agree with you in the sense that, to me, any
so
trade
it can be like a Kelly Olynyk, someone off the beaten path, if that's where the best value is. Because, that is a need that you can upgrade. I mean, this team is sort of in that middle ground. I guess that's the way I put it, is that they're a very good team without a lot of like super glaring weaknesses, but it's also not like the strengths are so clearly amazing that you can't upgrade them. So because of that, you can be a bit more sort of best player available and just look for talent, as opposed to just having to find a certain guy for one specific role.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think this team's not good enough to spend. They're good, but you don't know enough about what we need to effectively use a first-round pick. So any target that requires a first-round pick is off the table. If you think Clint Capella requires a first-round pick, then he's off the table. If you don't, and it's second-round picks, I can get convinced on many of them, because even a Clint Capella type, because I have confidence that it is because Ime Udoka said, hey, I need a guy like this.
Sure. And that's a key variable too. Yeah.
And if Ime Udoka says, hey, this guy's going to have enough value in the rotation that it's worth going and getting them, then I trust his judgment, because he's proven me wrong with Alperen Sengun already, right? And the way the way we're playing defense. But as I said, it's mostly that our defense is fine. Our The key weakness that I think we still have is bench offense, and that's why Olynyk makes so much sense to me. And he's sort of unique as well. I don't think there's anybody else out there that will give you what Kelly Olynyk can give you at the price that Kelly Olynyk can give it to you. That matches up contract-wise with. I mean, you can do a Olynyk for Oladipo straight swap, and he's used to the culture here. Not to the culture, he was in Houston. I mean, we love them. He talked about wanting to change the culture back then. Well, the culture has changed. It fit perfectly here. He's currently with the Jazz, who don't seem to be going anywhere. So they will enter selling mode at some point. And he is on an expiring contract, which means that there's basically no upside to them keeping him unless they plan on bringing him back, which even that would be doubtful. Why would he go back there unless they're just overpaying for him, which I guess they could, but it's just for a rebuilding team. And I know it's Danny Ainge, but it would be very, out of character. And key point, the Jazz don't have a second round pick this year. And they're in talent accumulation mode, and they're reaching that point where they're realizing, hey, this team's not going to be able to stay mediocre with this level of talent, and we either make a win now move, which I don't think they will, or we turn to tanking. And they witnessed firsthand last year that they didn't tank, and they got one of those 5 through 10 picks, which is kind of, we got a guy, but it's not really a guy we can build around. They got the 3 and D power forward. I forget what his name is. Taylor Hendricks, I think so. But the Jazz got him, and they can't build around him, and they're throwing Keontae George onto the fire, and it's not really going well. And so they're reaching that point where they're understanding. I would guess that they're understanding, hey, we need some top tier talent. We're not going to be able to do what the Celtics did and remain relevant throughout all of these years while collecting picks from someone else. They're going to reach a point where they're just wasting time because neither the Timberwolves nor the Cavs are looking like teams are going to be bad, in the next 2-3 years. So we might as well tank because, well, what are you doing really? You're not going anywhere. And so the fact that they don't have a second round pick this year, and the Rockets have 3, means it's one of the lone scenarios where the Rockets could unload 2 of them, right? The 2 worst of them if they want to. For a guy like Kelly Olynyk who can bring something to this team and can be, I think he could be a key acquisition, because even though he's probably not going to play more than 20 minutes a night, he brings something that we clearly do not have offensively with the second unit, and he can mirror whatever minutes Sengun has. And we have a lot of good defensive players. To me it makes too much sense for both teams for us to not be looking into it, unless, as I said, final verdict to Ime Udoka. If he doesn't think it's necessary, but it's definitely something that we should be looking into. But yeah, he is 7, 5, and 3, so he can still somewhat function as that little playmaking hub on 60, 41, 86 splits, which is basically what he was doing when he was here after the Miami Heat trade for that half a season. And we saw what he could do with bench units and guys that were basically not even worth being in the league at that point. So I know I've kind of gone on a long time for something that's really not that important, but I'm really passionate, and I really think we should bring Kelly Olynyk back. It makes so much sense from a team building perspective.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'll wind down this pod now because we've gone on for long enough. We can come back and talk about this more in the days and weeks ahead. But that's a really interesting thought exercise, because where I was going with it, I just don't see any one need, particularly the Capella one that gets thrown out on at least my feed from who I follow on Twitter/X so often. It's not a clear no. And again, if Ime wants that, then at this point he's earned our trust. I think that's the bottom line to any decision they make. But just looking at it from an outsider's perspective, I don't see that need as so glaring that you have to aggressively pursue it. If a guy comes that fills that, great. But, I was thinking maybe you try filling that with a player that you can get at a lower investment cost that has reduced expectations, maybe has a lower salary. Again, I'm not ignoring the fact that you do need to turn that Oladipo contract into something rather than just let it roll off the books. But there's a lot of things you can do with that. You can even, as I mentioned earlier, do like a Daniel Tice type deal where you have the team option for next year. And so that gives you optionality heading into the off season. But in terms of any major acquisition, again, you can think bigger, you can think talent. And, I was thinking sort of punting back in terms of the salary window if need be. But yeah, you could also think of a different need entirely. And you're right. You don't necessarily always need that above the rim big in every matchup. But yeah, the Rockets do have a lot of defensive oriented bigs. I don't really have one outside of Şengün that can consistently create their own offense. And the Rockets are not a club that does a ton in the way of self-creation off the dribble. So yeah, Olynyk does make sense. And I guess we're sort of on the same wavelength, just looking at it from different perspectives. Because you don't have that glaring need, you don't have to pigeon yourself to one particular type of player. You can look outside the box, experiment, and perhaps bring in someone of a different skill set altogether. And I think that's ultimately what an Olynyk deal would be. I don't expect it to happen anytime soon. This is something to just sort of get your mind, the wheels in your mind turning a little bit as we get closer to December 15th, which is the unofficial start to trade season in the NBA, December 15th, leading up to the early February trade deadline. Of course, the deadline is when all activity ends until the offseason, and December 15th is sort of the start of that window because that's when most players who signed in the offseason become trade eligible. So most of the league can be dealt. That's when teams know they're getting peak offers. And also for the Rockets, coincidentally, that's when Victor Oladipo and that nearly $10 million a year salary expiring can be aggregated in trades because you have to wait 60 days from the acquisition, which was in mid-October. Anyway, that's enough future talk because the Rockets are good enough now. We can focus on the present. That's what we did for the majority of this podcast. And of course, that's what we're going to be doing most of this season here at the Logger Line, where, boy, it's Paolo, closing thought, it's so much more fun to record these this year. The last couple of years, it was almost a burden to talk about the product on the floor. I always wanted to spin it to who are they going to hire as coach? Are they going to get James Harden or someone else in free agency? This is the first time in like 2 or 3 years that it's actually fun to talk Houston Rockets on-court basketball. Other than, there were a few moments here and there. Jalen goes for 40 in the game you came to Houston for. Jabari Smith had the winner against the Pelicans. It's not like it's been awful, but for the most part, yeah, it's been a grind. This is such, it feels like I'm falling back in love with the team again. Not that I never fell out of love with the franchise, but in terms of the team on the court, yeah, it was pretty tough the last couple of years. Whereas now, I mean, there's an excitement for me to watch every game, to podcast about these games in a way that there wasn't the last couple of years. I'm guessing that's where you are too, right?
Yeah, and it's not two things. First of all, it's not just the Rockets. I mean, Houston sports is firing on all cylinders. Joe Espada, CJ Stroud's like literally an MVP candidate. CJ Stroud. Yep. Sunday was a great day. But I guess to close out, I'll say, the Rockets right now, and this is obviously way too early, the Rockets are on pace for 54, 55 wins? Mm-hmm. We'll take that. We thought we
and were 9 games of 82 is not insignificant.
And we thought we were way too optimistic, saying 4-5 or 5-4, and they went 6-3.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel unsustainable. And actually, you can see ways in which it could get better, but it comes back to when you play defense with Rock and you care about and you try to extract the most out of every single margin that you can. You increase your floor by that much more, and I'm not expecting them to finish with 55 wins. They could. We haven't seen how they lose yet. But
Fred VanVleet has no interest in losing this game. Boy, his skills as a poor point guard, I pulled out that from the archives. That was a line I put a lot during the 2017 to 2018 season when Chris Paul was at his prime, and it felt like just with how he controls the flow of a game on both ends, you could just sense late in games when he would really make an impression and will his team to the finish line. Not saying Fred is at that level, but I use that line for a reason. He's that good. And so when you have a guy like Şengün in your front court and a point guard that takes care of the basketball the way Fred does and can make shots late in the game, it feels like you always have a shot to win any game on your schedule.
Yeah, you're to close it out, you are you're at the best of both worlds right now, because you already acquired all of the young talent that you're basically going to get at this point. If the Rockets get a top pick from the Nets, I highly doubt they'll actually make the pick unless it's like a top 1 or 2 pick and it's the guy that fits. But for the most part, I would expect them to trade it. You've got your core 6. That's your young talent. That's your upside, right? That's what you tank for. You didn't tank to give off these guys playing time, because the garbage time that they play while the team's bad is largely irrelevant, and we saw they progressed relatively little under Stephen Silas. But if you want to get excited for the future, if you think that this isn't sustainable, if you think this is a fluke and you want to think about the future like we did the past couple of years, think about this. Playing meaningful basketball, playing winning basketball and having to tailor your game around what the team needs on any given night is basically an hyperbaric chamber of development. And Alperen Şengün and Jalen Green are going to be so much better. We see it game to game, but by the end of the season, they're going to be so much better than they were to start the season because they're thrusted into this environment where nothing's guaranteed. They have to fight for every little thing. I would guess they develop more in this year, in this season, than they did for Jalen 2 seasons. For Jalen and Şengün, the 2 seasons they've gone through thus far, and for Jabari, obviously the 1 season, and Tari as well.
Yeah, and it may not be linear. It's worth noting that with Scottie Barnes taking the leap in Toronto, it's not that necessarily Fred set him up for that in terms of any X's and O's reason, although having, a pure point guard the first couple of years always helps. But just having a contending team may have put him in a better place to sort of take that leap entering year 3. And so even if for Jalen it doesn't happen this year on a consistent basis, then, Scottie's the guy from the same draft class, top 4, just like Jalen was, then maybe it sets him up for something special down the line.
Yeah, and I guess I've been tweeting this ever since our first win. So I'll just say the Rockets are undefeated in November, and they may never lose a basketball game ever again.
Yes. Well, the good news is by the time most of our listeners have listened to this podcast, that will actually be true because there isn't another game until very late Friday night in Los Angeles. Of course, we'll see what happens on the road trip, and we'll be back during or shortly after that to give you our thoughts, analysis, perhaps have some guests lined up as well. All right, on that positive note, we'll wrap it for today. We've gone on long enough. Again, I know it's only been 8 days, but a lot has happened in those 8 days, both with the present of Houston Rockets basketball and also a ton of implications for the future, especially with the aforementioned Alperen Şengün. Hopefully we did it justice today, but we'll try to do even more in the weeks ahead because if this trend continues, boy, the implications for the future are just all over the map in terms of what the future of this group looks like and what the blueprint for an eventual title contender looks like in the years ahead. And perhaps based on this start, it comes even sooner than we thought. All right, on those happy thoughts, we will adjourn for today. Again, for Paolo Alves, I'm Ben Dubose. If you want more content from us before the next show, the best place to get it is on Twitter. You can follow Paolo on Twitter /X at Paolo Alves NBA, me on there at Ben Dubose. And then the show, the Logger Line, if you go to that Twitter page, then you can find the link tree in the bio. That's where you can access not only our friends, sponsors, and partners, Karbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, support their content, USA Today's Rockets Wire as well. Check out everything they have to offer related to this team and beyond. But you can also find our individual distributors, Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. If you would be kind enough to leave a positive review, subscribe to the show if you haven't already, we would appreciate it. And of course, you would get the benefit of knowing when each and every episode is put out. Again, I want to thank our sponsors at Karbach Brewing one more time. They're who puts this on for us with support from Sports Talk 790. And this is our second season of doing this show together for myself and Paolo, but in many ways it feels like the first because whereas last year it was a bit of a grind to get through these episodes, it's not now. We've been going on for nearly an hour and a half and it feels like the time flew because there's just so many fun things to talk about, and not just fun, but interesting as well when it comes to this 2023 to 24 Houston Rockets basketball team, which as we're recording this on Tuesday, November 14th, is 6-3 on the season with 6 consecutive wins. All right, that'll do it for today. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.